So, any question, comment? Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Barbara Jones, and I'm with the American Library Association. But I also work with IFLA, which is an international library group, and I'm on the Freedom of Expression Committee there. And we are very interested in this committee. We're going to be meeting in August to talk about this. We're very interested in building bridges to the librarians in these countries from the Arab Spring. And how best should we approach this when we're approaching a group of people who have felt pretty intimidated over the years? Do you have any suggestions on our best approach?
Maybe Jillian, Nasser.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question. Are you in touch at all with the Middle East Librarians Association in the U.S.?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to ask.
What we've discovered is that there are several, and there's some feuding going on, and I don't want to get into details because I honestly don't understand all of it myself. But that's one of the issues. I mean, who do we contact? Who's considered legitimate? Do we want to go that route? I mean, do we want to go a less traditional route? We're very tied in with the ICT groups internationally, so.
I really don't know the answer to this one.
I would answer you like very practically. I mean, the best thing that you can do to help is transferring knowledge, building capacity, bringing libraries, training people, finding people to train and get them to apply the kind of things that procedures and attitudes that you have here to take them over there. It has to be somebody indigenous from the region, from the culture, who operates in those sense. And transferring knowledge is ultimately, I think, is something, the most valuable thing that you could do.
Yeah, we have another question.
Yeah, I'm Laura Ballard. I'm with the State Department, and I'm also on Twitter. I follow a lot of the Egyptian. Yeah, we were just tweeting 2 hours ago, and then I looked at the program. Oh wow. I take some issue with the notion that the activists don't care about privacy. I think they actually do. They may not know that they do, or they may not know that what they're talking about is actually privacy. I watched them tweet through the Egyptians, the big raid on the Amandala headquarters, and I know people who, said, oh, I know people who walked out with files, and I watched them tweet back and forth, what do we do about these files? And somebody said, well, let's give them all to WikiLeaks. And then somebody else said, well, but wait, that doesn't seem right. This looks like blackmail material. Like, why would we put citizens' files up on WikiLeaks? And at some point, I resorted to tweeting out a copy of the OECD privacy guidelines and said, look, here's some basic concepts of informational privacy. I also think that they are quite seized with the issue of surveillance. And it's something that you guys haven't talked a whole lot about. You've talked more about censorship and blocking and filtering. And, frankly, we do too. I mean, we have an internet freedom strategy. But in general, I think we find it easier to speak out about censorship and blocking because we can see so easily when it's happening. Whereas with surveillance issues, I think it's hard for us to know. You can sort of see the end result when all the bloggers end up in jail. You think, oh, well, they must have been surveilled. But I think it's very hard to know without, I guess, a very high degree of counter-surveillance what's going on. I think it's also quite hard to criticize because I think all governments have some legitimate law enforcement activity that they need to carry out. Every government is going to have a different approach to how to create a system of checks and balances so that your police are not exercising authority excessively. So I'm curious, to hear more about your experience in Tunisia with the issue of surveillance, and is there a long-term plan to sort of dealing with that issue in addition to the issue of blocking and censorship?
Maybe I should take that one and then you. Yeah, well, I probably should have been clearer when I said that they don't care about privacy. I see your point, and I agree with you that they do care about surveillance, but the surveillance from the government. And especially until the revolution, and also still now, there is a lot of conspiracy theory going on in the country. But what I meant is that they are all using a lot of them are using Facebook, and they don't care about their privacy as Facebook users. They don't care about their privacy not in matters of surveillance. They are still reluctant to be controlled by the government, of course, but privacy is not an issue that is really mentioned in the discussions. Data protection is not an issue that is really mentioned in the discussions on the internet. And maybe there are some cultural issues that can explain that, but I think there has been too much the focus on the freedom of expression and the fight against the control and censorship. Maybe, yeah.
The comment is in Tunisia, the main focus of internet community now is for sure censorship. This is because of the decision made by the president, or the order of Ben Ali before he left the country, and also the circumstance of how ITI blocked the 5 pages of Facebook, and also how we dealt with the decision of the court. So, for privacy, we have a law. We have a law since 2004, but this law is not
enforced.
Enforced, yeah. Exactly. It's not enforced, but people didn't care about that law and didn't pay attention on why this law is not really enforced. It will be very important. I know that when this censorship case will be much more clear, because now there is 2 kinds of people. People thinking, okay, Tunisia, we don't need any censorship. And the other people say, okay, we need censorship for some contents like pornography, pedophilia, and so on. So, and these 2 kinds of people are in debate now. They're discussing and they are tweeting, and you have a lot of debate in Facebook, in social networking. I think that when this issue will be at least not solved totally, but at least we have some answers about how Tunisia will deal with filtering in the future. It could be the privacy, and this law for privacy would be enforced, and should think about all those issues.
Any other?
Yeah, no, I was just going to speak a bit to surveillance as well. I mean, you've got, you did have strong examples from January when the Tunisian government was supposedly phishing people's Facebook passwords. And then in Syria, I think part of the issue here is that up until very recently, Syria is a heavy surveillance society anyway. Forget about ICTs, it's a surveillance society. People know what other people are doing. And a few years ago, a Syrian that I know who has now emigrated to the US found that he was being visited at home because a cyber cafe owner was reporting on his activities at the cyber cafe. So things like that happen all the time. And Syria is now moving from this more sort of traditional model of surveillance to a more technological one, and I have my suspicions about who's helping them with that. But it seems like now, whereas 2 months ago they were arresting Facebook users and trying to get their passwords through that means, now there's suspicion, and it's unconfirmed, and I will say that, but that the government has actually tried to give fake SSL certificates to Facebook users using the HTTPS version of Facebook, and we confirmed it, Facebook could not confirm it, so there's some tension there. But essentially what you have is a move from traditional surveillance to more pervasive online surveillance, and I think that's a serious risk. But I think in terms of privacy, I also would disagree a little bit. I do think people are concerned, but I also think that privacy gets thrown by the wayside sometimes. I was at a training a couple years ago where Tor was on the table, and people were learning how to use Tor, Tor circumvention and anonymity, and anonymity is really obviously an issue in a lot of these places. But frankly, we were in Beirut during this training, and Beirut has possibly the slowest internet in the entire world, and I'm not kidding when I say that. No censorship, but incredibly low bandwidth. And people literally could not get the tool to work. And they're going, well, most of them didn't live in Lebanon, but they're saying, okay, well, if I can't even get it to work, how am I going to use it? And so it was this is too difficult, forget about it. Privacy is not so important, I need to be able to do this activity. And so I do think that at least the people that I know, who are obviously the very techie elite, do care about these issues, but I think that they often are deprioritized.
in terms of surveillance, again, we touched on this a little bit. I'm going to repeat it again because it is very important. Arab countries, Arab regimes, and Iran per se do not produce any internet filtering technology. They don't make these things. They buy them from somewhere else, and those somewhere else is the West. And it is very important to have that conversation rather than just brush it aside and say, yeah, it's a private sector, etc. And the challenge there is that there isn't any binding. For example, I give an interview to a reporter. By the way, they cut that part. It was very interesting. I made the following point. I was like, look, weapons, armament, highly regulated. Trading in, fighter jets, that kind of technologies, there's very stringent frames of regulations and law that regulate that and prevent these things from falling into the wrong hands. What is there for for the internet? Not much. And even that much that doesn't exist, no one seems to be putting the political will into enforcing. So when a country like Bahrain, by the way, which is increasingly becoming a model of using these tools, they're flush with cash, and their human rights abuse record has been established. Add to that the support of, or their money also buys them the tools that will allow them to conduct surveillance. Something is fundamentally wrong with this picture, because if we don't have regulations or work frames that regulate that transfer of technology, as far as I'm concerned, the surveillance technology, and as was proven in Iran by Nokia and Siemens, as far as I'm concerned, giving them that capability is tantamount to shipping to them a full brigade of 105 millimeter howitzer cannons. The end result is the same, devastating to human life. That needs to be addressed beyond simple, I'd say, intellectual discussions. It needs to be taken seriously and turned into a work frame, a normative work frame.
And I also think that it's also up to us in this community to remember that these issues affect us too. I mean, they affect American businesses. They affect people who are, they affect American companies that are trying to export technologies. This is not simply, limited to this region. I think that this is an issue that we should all be caring about and all getting involved in, rather than just limiting it to this space.
Maybe I can add back to Tunisia for one example. For some years there is the biometric passport in Tunisia. In France we have had a very strong campaign against the biometric passport, and we still have a court case pending against the government. I know in other European countries, and especially here in the US, there have been campaigns running against passport and biometric IDs. There was no such discussions in Tunisia. And the point here that I would like to mention, and to follow up on Nasser's point, is that these people from these countries, organizations from this country, should not be only invited to conferences as witnesses. They should be there as part of the global discussion. This should be part of this intellectual discussions all over the world. They have their word to say. And this needs, it's a long process. It needs capacity building. It needs to consider this as a priority. It will take time, but this is something we should do, and we should work towards.
And civil society has to do a lot.
Exactly, I meant civil society.